Okay. And now we're at the final part of the process here. So once you've built your wealth, there's questions about how much wealth you need, what are kind of like the different levels, the way that I think about it, and when do you stop the process of accumulating wealth? So I break down the five levels, or the levels of wealth into five. It starts with really making enough money and having more money, basically making more money than you can spend. That's a really big deal. That's pretty easy for engineers, but it's not for a lot of people. Once you have that, then it's about building your emergency fund. That will take about a year or two. This will kind of give you that sense of security so that if you lose your job, you're you have something to fall back onto. And the next sort of level that I think about is once you have something like 10 years worth of your expenses in a bank account or in a brokerage account, that really gives you a lot of options because you start thinking about like, oh, if I like stop working right now, I like don't have to work for 10 years. There's like a lot of space that it gives you in terms of thinking about your different options. And when I think about options, it's like, do I want to work in this particular job with this company or in this place? And do I want to take bigger risks in terms of being able to start your own business or things like that? And so having sort of this amount of money um, just gives you options. And then four, I would say the level is when you really have enough money to kind of cover all the expenses that you expect to have for you and your family going into the future. And this is basically what people call like financial independence. And that's kind of when you are essentially free from having to think about money anymore. And this I think should be the target for most people, and it can happen as early as 8 years into your career, or it could take you 25 years. It just depends on how much you spend, really. So the final level, I think, beyond really having all of your costs considered and paid for, is just having enough money to do things that take even more money than that, right? That's like fulfilling all the dreams that you might potentially have beyond just being able to live and so on. So these are sort of the different levels that I think about. And again, for or financial independence is kind of what most people should be going for. That's kind of what people call retirement in a way. That's like when you can choose to not work anymore and everything's fine. So getting to that financial independence is kind of like a rocket ship or a spaceship trying to reach orbit around the Earth. And the reason why I think about it like that is because initially it takes a lot of effort to try to get to pull away from the Earth and fight the gravity that you have. But the higher up it goes, it actually gets easier. So it's kind of similar to when you don't have any money at first. Getting to the first like 100,000 is kind of difficult for. It takes a lot more time than getting to your like second or fifth 100,000, and it's the same thought process behind like getting to your first million is much more difficult and takes a lot more time than doubling that once more to 2 million. So it's a process. This process of compounding is exponential, and so it really does take kind of a lot of effort at first, but once you get it going and once you finally get into orbit, it's like you're still falling, right? In the same way that like an object in orbit is still falling, it's just you're kind of going around the Earth faster than you're falling down towards it. And the analogy here is like you're spending money when you are financially independent, but the the amount of money that your money is making for you without you working is going to be enough for you to continue to be at that same level of wealth. And so you're not actually getting closer to zero. And so how much money do you actually need to be financially independent? Many people use a simple rule of thumb of a 4% withdrawal guideline for how much money you need. And essentially, that's coming from research or that kind of looked at how do you have like a 0% chance of like losing all of your money after like 30 years or something like that if you withdraw a certain amount. And it's somewhere around that number, which means that you need about 25 times what your annual expenses are. So if you're spending, $60,000 a year, you need 1.5 million. And if you double that, you're going to need 3 million. And if you spend something like $200,000 a year, then you're going to need around 5 million. Obviously, like there's taxes, so you probably need a little bit more, but it's going to be something like that. So as you can see, it kind of depends a lot on what expenses you have. So having children is a massive expense, like huge. I recently was looking into this and calculating like how much it would be to have children. It's somewhere like in like the $600,000 range per kid in today's dollars, because a lot of the stuff that you have to pay for are in the future. So if you're actually able to have that amount of money set aside today, it costs less than it would if once you add up the total nominal numbers for all the different years over like 22 years or something like that. So it's a lot of money, and it's going to delay your financial independence for a few years if you choose to have kids. And also a big consideration is your living expenses, and a big part of that is actually the rent. So if you look at international options like Mexico or Portugal, or even smaller American cities like Atlanta or Chicago, the rent is just so much lower in those places compared to places like New York or San Francisco, that you can lower the amount of spend that you need to do each year, which means you're lowering how much money you actually need. This is kind of like the same reason why a lot of people end up moving to Florida, because, or I guess Texas also, they both don't have like income taxes at the state level. A lot of the properties are cheaper than they would be in New York. And so if life is cheaper, you don't need as much money. And like the most accurate way to figure this all out is to go like build a spreadsheet and kind of forecast your different expenses year to year, which I've done for myself. But you can also you can talk to a financial advisor to like work on this with you. They should be able to do this for you as well. And just to kind of give a sort of guideline, if these numbers that I've picked for how much you're spending are kind of sort of the normal-ish range that people might spend in New York. So I would think that most people in New York probably get by with 5 million, and kind of have that cover their costs, just because there's just not that many people that are spending over $200,000 a year. You can, but oftentimes that includes things like private school, which I don't think is strictly necessary. So like if you have the money, go ahead and spend it. But it's certainly like for like being able to not have to work anymore, that is not what I would consider to be necessary. Okay. So just these are kind of to give you an idea of what the numbers are approximately. So how long do you actually need to work to get to those numbers? And so obviously the more you spend, the longer you're going to have to work, right? That's pretty obvious. We talked about earlier how like 1 to 5 million is fairly easy to get to before 65. And 5 to 10 is also pretty easy. You just take more time. So what does that mean? Like on this graph, if we start at age 22, 1.5 million in real dollars is somewhere around 10 years. So it's somewhere around here, right? So if you're spending $60,000 a year, which I think is fairly modest, it's definitely like you're able to like travel a fair amount, but the rent is something that you have to control quite well, because rent can get away from you, and that'll really increase your costs. But if you can kind of stick to something close to $60,000 a year, that's going to be somewhere around like 1.5. Now that doesn't include children, so like if you want that, that'll take more time. But just to give you an idea, like in 10 years, you can probably have somewhere around $1.5 million in real, like year $0 here. And then if you think you need more than that, 3 million in real is about 16 years. That's somewhere over here, 3 million. And then 5 million, the number that we kind of said would probably work for most people, is somewhere around 22 years. So 5 million is around here. So by the age of like 44, you'll probably have enough money for pretty much anything. This to be financially independent, right? And this assumes no partner or children. So if you want those things, and those to have a family, then you're going to have to probably increase some of these numbers. And this assumes like a 7% nominal return. The market on a nominal basis is closer to 10%. So if you assume something like 8%, these numbers for years do go down as well. But the main gist of this is that the more you spend, the longer you're going to have to work to get to this point. So it's kind of a trade-off in terms of do you want to spend more money now and along your life, or would you rather just be done with working earlier? Or do you just want to accumulate more money throughout your life? So, once you get to kind of above this like 5 to 10 million, like when is like there enough money? Like what is, so we've already gotten to like level 4 here, right? There's already beyond financial independence. What is that number? And I think that's the sort of thing where you can actually get to some really high numbers towards the end of your life if you're kind of just continue to work. And so because of the exponential nature of this, a lot of this kind of happens towards the end of life, right? So if you're living until like 94, you're doubling from that, starting from like somewhere around here. Like that 15 years is like what you need to like double the last part, right? So, or actually it's probably close to 12, but like the point being that 12 years, towards the end, like what's the point of having like $40 million when you're 82? Is that something that you care that much about? Or would you rather have the money earlier? And like you kind of have to think about like, do I want to spend the money here where it's potentially very useful and have better vacations here when I'm mid 30s, or do I want to have a bigger number when I'm 80? Like those trade-offs are things you should consider, and they're generally pretty personal. But I think like beyond this kind of 5 to 10 number, you should really be thinking about what specific thing might I want to have in order to kind of motivate getting to that number. So, for example, I would love to be able to buy a lower league English soccer team. And so it's kind of like similar to Welcome to Wrexham and what they did there with Wrexham Football Club. And so I think for something like that, you kind of need somewhere around $30 million. And the reason why I say that is because the cost to buy Wrexham was around $2.5 million. And this was, a few years ago now. But also they were investing something like $1 million a year into the actual business. So you need to have enough money that's generating enough to cover that 1 million extra dollars, or a couple million extra dollars a year, for it to be an ongoing concern. You can't just buy one of these clubs and then expect it to be profitable immediately. It's most likely not going to be. So you're going to need to subsidize that, which means you're going to need to have more money than just the purchase price of one of these clubs. Okay. The reason why I talk about having a specific number that is tied to something tangible that you care about is that if you don't have that and your goal is just to have as much money as possible, that can lead to some problems, because you're kind of just like measuring your success based on how much money you have. And the way I think about it is that the money is always a means to some sort of end. And so, if you end up thinking about it as a measure of success, I think it kind of creates an unhappiness in people, because they tend to think that they never have enough money, and they also, it's very easy to say, oh, I've already crossed, the $3 million mark. Now my goal is to get to six. Okay, well, those just keep going up. Like there's no stop to that. You can accumulate kind of indefinitely until basically your life, the amount of life you have, is really the limiting factor there, and obviously the returns, but generally the time is the part that's the problem. Some people, there's a lot of examples of people who are either sacrificing health or relationships with their family and friends in order to have more money, and that's just generally not really worth it, in my opinion. Especially because, like, at the end of your life, you're not gonna, if you're measuring by how much money you have at the end of your life, you're just not gonna need. It doesn't make a difference having 40 versus 50. There's just not that big of a difference. So the other problem is that some people, who already have a lot of money, end up doing illegal stuff like Bernie Madoff, and it's really stupid. Like, why would you trade away your freedom for more money? It doesn't make any sense at all. So really past that like financial independence point, the happiness ends up being way more important than having more money, especially because a lot of those goals, like these are dreams, right? They're not like things that are kind of like necessary, really. They're just like things that you kind of want to have, but they're kind of optional. But yeah, I think the last thing to think about is you have to remember that about every 10 years, stocks will double. And so this is, using the rule of 72 to estimate kind of how quickly something doubles. And if you assumed a 7% rate of return for the US market, then dividing 7 into 72 is about 10. And that gives you an estimate for how quickly your money will double. So really the best way to like get rich is just living a really long amount of time. And so you got to take care of your physical and mental health, because it's really a marathon. And so you have to find a sustainable way and a sustainable pace to kind of live it. You can't just burn, spend so much time and effort at the beginning to sort of damage a lot of your health and your relationships, only to kind of find that you missed out on a lot of time, let's say with your children or with your spouse, and now, like, even though you have all this money, you've lost the point. You've lost a lot of happiness. So with that, I want to wish you a happy and a healthy and a rich life.